everyone. Welcome to another East Brunswick Human Relations Council event. My name is Ravisani Gill. I'm the council member of East Brunswick Human Relations Council, also known as EBHRC. The Human Relations Council is a council appointed by Mayor Brad Cohen. The main focus of EBHRC is to promote diversity, tolerance, acceptance, and inclusion across the township of East Brunswick. Our Coffee and Conversation series has been going on for a couple of years now, where we tackle various issues from bias and stereotypes, combating mental health, ageism, anti-Asian racism. We also had a series where we brought in community helpers during pandemic. All our prior recordings are available on our East Brunswick Human Relations Council page, Facebook page. We're thankful for being able to host another in-person panel conversation today. Today's topic is on anti-Semitism, which is really discrimination against Jews. To talk a little bit more on the topic, I'd like to introduce my fellow council member, Holly Sarami.
Thank you. Hi. So today's topic is anti-Semitism. As I hope most of you know, anti-Semitism is a growing problem in the United States. Understanding what anti-Semitism is, what the effects of anti-Semitism are, could help us to understand how to prevent it, how to stand up against it, and how to help people who are victims of it. By religion, 60% of the hate crimes in the U.S. are directed against Jews, in spite of the fact that Jews only make up 2% of the United States population. So this is a disproportionate problem, and it will take the help of everybody to prevent this from growing and continuing the way it has. Before we begin today's panel discussion, I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us what role you play in your organization.
Thanks, Holly. My name is Dan Rozett. I am the manager of Community Relations and Israel Engagement at Jewish Federation in the heart of New Jersey, a nonprofit organization that serves the Jewish community in Middlesex and Monmouth counties.
I'm Rabbi Esther Reed. I'm the interim executive director at Rutgers University Hillel. We are an organization for Jewish students serving the New Brunswick and Piscataway campuses of Rutgers University. And I grew up in East Brunswick, so this is a homecoming for me.
And my name is Joshua Hess, and I'm the rabbi at the Young Israel of East Brunswick, the only Orthodox synagogue in the community. And grateful, all of us are grateful that you invited us to be part of this important panel.
We thank you for being here. So the first question I'd like to ask each of you, but I'll start with you, Dan. Can you tell us how we can identify anti-Semitism? How can people recognize when anti-Semitic acts are taking place?
Thanks, Holly. So it's true, anti-Semitism manifests in many different ways. However, there is a document that one can refer to, and it was created by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's called the EBHRC Working Definition of Anti-Semitism. And really, just about every type of anti-Semitism or form of anti-Semitism is mentioned there. I can highlight a few. For example, calling for or acting, aiding or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of radical ideology or an extremist view of religion, that is considered anti-Semitism. Accusing Jews of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, or even acts committed by non-Jews. And one more I'll highlight, defying the fact scope mechanisms, for example, let's say the gas chambers, or intentionality of genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis and its supporters and accomplices during World War II. And then there are many other forms listed in this document, so I highly recommend anyone wanting to understand better what anti-Semitism is to look that up online.
I'm just going to add that anti-Semitism is usually defined as prejudice against or hatred of Jews. And the word anti-Semitism was first coined in 1879, even though hatred of Jews has been around for centuries. In 1879, Wilhelm Marr, an anti-Semitic German publicist, utilized the word anti-Semitismus in his 1879 booklet, The Way to Victory of Germanism over Judaism, which ultimately became quite well known. And so It is a relatively new term, although hatred and bigotry against Jews is not new.
And I would just add on a practical level, I think anti-Semitism would manifest itself in two types of ways. One is the more overt type of anti-Semitism, when you might hear someone yell out the window of their car while we're walking down the street, with some inflammatory words, F you, a Jew, go get out of my country, and that's overt, and you can tell obviously that that's anti-Semitic. They hate you, or they don't want you to be here. But then there are also some covert forms of anti-Semitism when politicians, or sometimes you hear this dual loyalty, that are you American? Do you support America, or do you support Israel? What's your loyalty? And that's, again, that's almost like a code word for an anti-Semitic remark, that it's impossible to be an American and love your country and at the same time also love the state of Israel. So these are the types of hidden words or phrases that are used that are clearly anti-Semitic. You just sometimes need to be educated about it in order to know what they're trying to get at.
So that actually brings me to my next question. Some people have the view that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, and conversely, that support of Israel is either anti-Palestinian or you can't, as you said, be a good American. I'd like to talk about the differences between supporting a country and supporting all of its policies, between the idea that, like in America or in Israel, you could not agree with everything they do, but you can still have a loyalty to the country. And I think tied into that, and I know this is broad, so if you'd like to break it out, but I think also tied into that is this idea of Zionism, and this whole tie between Zionism and anti-Semitism, and and what is Zionism, and are you a Zionist, are you pro-Israel do you have to be a Zionist to be pro-Israel? Or can you be pro-Israel without being a Zionist? And what does it mean to be a Zionist? I think all of that tied together has a lot of misconceptions. I know it's a lot at once, but I think I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about that whole topic, because I think it all ties in together.
So I'll jump in. I'll start with the last question.
Okay.
I define Zionism as believing that Jews have a right to a country of their own in the area of the land of Israel. Now, we can argue about what those borders are, and we can argue about how that country should be run, but the simple idea that Jews have a right to a homeland in that area is my definition of Zionism, and that Jews have a right to be safe and secure within whatever those borders would be. So that's how I talk about it on campus, and it's an idea that Jews and non-Jews can ascribe to. You don't have to be Jewish to agree with the concept that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. There are many Christian countries. There are many Muslim countries. There are countries that are predominantly Hindu or other religions as well. And there's only one Jewish country on the entire planet. In terms of one of your other questions, I'm a patriotic American, but over the years of my life, I have not always agreed with every administration in the United States. That there's sometimes presidents I like, there's sometimes presidents I don't like, but I'm still a patriotic American. And similarly, I can support Israel and love Israel, even though I might disagree with certain policies or certain administrations. And I think legitimate criticism of Israel is saying that a particular policy is wrong while still recognizing that Israel has a right to exist. When people chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," they're talking about from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And that is currently the state of Israel. So if you want to free that entire area, then you're saying Israel does not have a right to exist at all as a Jewish state. So it's an anti-Zionist slogan, and that's why it's problematic for me.
So can I jump in? Okay. So I'm going to focus a little bit from the Israeli side because I lived in Israel 20 years of my life. Israel is a democracy, and legitimate criticism of Israel's government is encouraged. Israeli citizens criticize their government all the time, just like in any healthy democracy. So does the Israeli press. Israel is a country, and Rabbi, you touched on that. Israel is a country like any other country. They have good policies and bad policies. But like I said, Israel is a thriving democracy. Supporting Israel doesn't mean you can't support a Palestinian state. In fact, many Israelis believe that supporting a Palestinian state is a very pro-Israel idea because it promotes peace, or it can lead to peace. So that's something else that is important to take into consideration. However, and we might get into this later, but I think maybe I'll mention this now, legitimate criticism of Israel can easily turn into anti-Semitism. And again, there's an easy way to, in my opinion, an easy way to identify when legitimate criticism becomes anti-Semitism, and it's called the 3Ds test. The first D is demonization. So if the state of Israel is demonized, meaning, Israel's actions are being blown out of proportion, or out of sensible proportion, compared, to other similar situations, that's demonizing. If you're comparing Israelis to Nazis, that's demonizing. If you're comparing Palestinian refugee camps, which there are, to Auschwitz or any other concentration camp, that's demonizing. So that's one. Two, is holding Israel to a double standard. Like I said, you can criticize Israel all you want, as long as you're holding it to the same standards as other countries in the same category, meaning other Western democracies, I guess. If you're not doing that, then that's also considered anti-Semitism. And we see that a lot in United Nations when Israel is called out frequently on, human rights violations. But the United Nations ignores China and Syria and Iran and other countries that grossly violate human rights in their country. And you can look up the record of how many times Israel was condemned in the UN compared to other countries, and you'll see how way out of proportion that is. And the third D is delegitimization. If you are denying, and Rabbi, you definitely said this, if you're denying Israel's right to exist, its legitimate right to exist, that is clearly anti-Semitism. Anything else besides those 3 Ds, no matter how harsh, is legitimate criticism.
And just to piggyback on everyone's previous comments, anti-Semitism is hate against a people. Anti-Zionism is hate against a nation state. The problem is, as Rabbi Reed mentioned, that when you say that the Jewish people don't have a right that their state doesn't have a right to exist, well then that's not just a hate against the nation state, it's a hate against the people as well. Jews have been hated on for centuries, whether it's been hate based on our religion or hate based on our race. Now the newer form of anti-Semitism has mutated, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory, would say, and that it's mutated, and now anti-Semitism is, the new form of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, and that's unacceptable.
And I just think one thing to be perfectly clear, and you really said this, Rabbi Reed, is a lot of people, I think, equate being Zionistic with Israel expansion. If you're a Zionist, you want to see Israel expansion. And that's not necessarily true, because the real, as you said, the real definition is this idea that Israel should exist. So I could be a Zionist who believes Israel should exist, but at the same time feel Israel should not be expanding its borders. And still not be anti-Semitic, not be anti-Zionist, and not be anti-Israel. I just don't agree with a specific policy. So saying I don't agree with that policy doesn't mean I'm not a Zionist. And I think there's a big tie-in in people's minds with the idea that if you're a Zionist, you are this person who says Israel should have the whole Middle East, and be aggressive. And that's not true. I think we need to reiterate that idea. Being a Zionist just means means they should exist. How they should exist is debatable, but the state should exist. And that's the real definition, and that's something I think is not very clear in people's minds. And I think that misconception leads to a lot of talk and rhetoric that's incorrect and a lot of misunderstanding. So I think that that's a good point to make clear.
So just to clarify also, as someone coming from this from like a new perspective, so would you say that being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitism? If someone were to express views like that?
I personally do consider anti-Zionism to be anti-Semitism, because you're denying the Jewish people a right to self-determination and a right to having a country just like any other people wants to have a country. Now, there are certain peoples on the planet who do not have their own country, and there are wars in different places, but for the countries that have been established, they have a right to exist, and Israel is one of them.
Got it.
Right. I think the problem is that whole definition,
right?
That blur of that definition of what it is to be a Zionist.
And if I can jump in, I think it's important also to understand why the Jewish people are so tied to this strip of land. Many times when discussing the conflict, as far as timeline, the discussion starts in the 18th or 19th century, but that's incorrect. That's denying factual historical proof of Jewish presence in this area for thousands of years. When somebody asks me, when does the claim, so to speak, start, I don't talk about the 18th or 19th century. Biblical times is where I start, and whether you're religious or not, for whatever reason, whether you believe God promised this land to the children of Israel or not, but the fact is, historically, Jews have been, there's been a continuous presence of Jews in this area, sometimes small, sometimes not, in this area. So Jews consider themselves indigenous to this part of the land. It's not like we're colonizing. A lot of times you'll hear, Israelis are colonizing this land. No, we were exiled thousands of years ago, and in the 20th century, for whatever reasons, we were able to come back, return. That's key. We are returning to our homeland. But, however, I will say, you can't deny the facts on the ground, and there is another people that live in the area, and they too have been there for centuries. This is the reality on the ground. And I'll tie this back into, being a Zionist and what kind of Zionist. If you can support a Palestinian state and still be a strong Zionist. Right. You have to accept, in my opinion, the reality on the ground. We can't just say this was the 12 tribes of Israel and we, own all of this land. Can't do that. The reality is there is another people, and we should identify. We should deal with that situation. We should find a way to really. I don't like to use the word share, but I guess that's what it is. But again, I really want to bring this home. There are many ways to be a Zionist, right. And not necessarily alienate the Palestinians, for example.
And I think the fact that you brought up that there's been a continuous presence, maybe not a majority presence and maybe not a ruling presence, but there has been a continuous presence of Jews living in that area. People do have families that have been there. We call them sabras, right? Who have been there for generations and generations. It's not only, people think of Israel, they think of people coming from Europe after the war, and they think that's the only people that are there. But that's not true.
So I want to just jump in as well that the first archaeological evidence we have of a Jewish presence in the land of Israel is from around 1000 BCE. And that Jews were continuously living in the land of Israel through the Roman expulsion in the year 70, although there were some Jews who remained, especially in the northern part of the country, and continued to live there through centuries, through the Crusades, through the medieval period. And there's a well-known community in northern Israel where some of our prayer service was written in the 15th century. We have evidence for this. We're not just making it up. And I wanted to also say, speaking of prayer, that part of our prayer emphasizes our connection to the land of Israel. Wherever you are on the planet, you face Israel. And if you're in Israel, you face Jerusalem. And if you're in Jerusalem, you face the area where we once had our temple standing. So for all the years that Jews have lived in Poland or Morocco or in Yemen or South Africa, they have faced Israel in their prayers, in their daily prayers 3 times a day. And our prayers talk about the longing to return to the land of Israel. So it's a deep part of our culture, our history, and our religion.
King David, if you go back to the Bible, King David brought the tabernacle, set up the ark in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, long before a Christian existed, long before a Muslim existed, there were Jews in Jerusalem. So it's certainly our Jerusalem is our eternal capital, and Israel is our homeland.
And other religions have that same thing. I mean, the Muslims have Mecca, the Christians have the Vatican City. So it's not a unique idea. It's not a uniquely Jewish idea. It's just that we have not as large of a presence in that area, maybe as some of these other people have been able to maintain in what they consider their holy city. But it's not a unique idea to Jews to have a city that they consider holy. And I think it's a difficult idea to say to us now, well, pick somewhere else, And that's kind of the feeling of saying, well, Israel doesn't have the right to exist there, is, well, okay, maybe you've had that for your holy city for thousands of years, but pick somewhere else. We don't like that idea anymore. And that's anti-Zionist, and that's anti-Semitic, because there's a reason that we picked Jerusalem. It wasn't, like you said, it wasn't just something we came up with, So I think that understanding also is important.
Can I just add one more thing to this
Sure.
specific topic, if that's okay? One of the biggest misconceptions about Zionism is that Zionism is racism. In fact, the UN, I believe it was 1975,
Sounds about right.
did decide that Zionism was racism, and then I forget when, in the 80s, maybe in the 90s, they overturned that. But that's not true. It is really not true. Like I said before, Israel is a democracy, and yes, it is true that Jews do have a special status, but it's important to understand that there is something called the right of return, which means that every Jew can move to Israel and get immediate citizenship. But it's important to understand why. Jews never had a safe haven. And Israel was created in 1948, 3 years after 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe. They had nowhere to go. So yes, Jews do have a special status in Israel. Israel is a Jewish state. However, there are Arab, Muslim, Christian, Druze, and other minority groups in Israel that are citizens, and they have the exact same rights that the Jewish Israelis have. Many of them are police officers. Many of them are judges. Many are doctors and researchers.
And in the government.
And in the government, that's correct.
That's an important thing.
Correct, thank you.
They're part of the government.
They are part of the government, and the previous government, Israel now has a new government, but in the previous government, they were part of the coalition. They were part of the ruling coalition in Israel. So Zionism is not racism, and that's very important to understand, and I really wanted to drive that home.
And I don't want to be like anti-American, but I think it's not really America, but I think a lot of the UN policies have affected people's understanding of Israel, and then that, I think there's some degree to which anti-Semitism in this country is growing out of this, like you said, it's out of this feeling of Israel. That's why I felt this is such an important topic to discuss as part of this. Like you said, Rabbi Hess, that this is the new way of blaming Jews or hating Jews, is now it's being tied to Israel. So I think an understanding of Israel and the fact that, like, so many UN policies that you've mentioned, helps you to understand what anti-Semitism is and why, people should not use that as an excuse to hate Jews, because that has become the excuse. And it's really sad to see a place like the UN that's supposed to be helping promote peace, really make people more divisive and really promote ideas that are incorrect and attack a country. So
I would be remiss if I didn't add to this conversation, if we didn't talk about the origins of Zionism. We talked before about how Israel was founded in 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II, but the concept of Zionism goes back further. in the 1880s, Theodore Herzl was a journalist, and he was covering the trial of Alfred Dreyfus, who was being persecuted as a Jew in the French military and was set up. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the virulent anti-Semitism in France was shocking for Theodore Herzl to witness, and he wrote about it and wrote about how there really needs to be a Jewish state as a safe haven for Jews, and started working towards that. And in 1897, he organized the first World Zionist Congress, where people would come together from all over the world with delegations from different countries. And it still happens to this day that there's a World Zionist Congress where people come from the United States, from South Africa, from England, from all over, and they go, and now it's held in Jerusalem, and they talk about these issues. But the concept of the need for Jews to have a safe homeland far predates World War II. And I also just want to let you know that shortly after Israel was established as a state by a vote of the UN, which we've been talking about, countries that were predominantly Muslim expelled the Jews from their homes and out of their countries, and they couldn't take their possessions and their valuables with them. And so by the 1950s, Israel was a predominantly Middle Eastern Jewish country. The population was more than 50% Jews from the Middle East and not Jews from Europe. So it's very important that we understand the history, and we understand that it's not a European colonization of the land, as Israel's detractors say, but recognizing the longstanding indigenous people, the Jews who had been in Israel over the centuries, and then people who were exiled from Arab countries and had no other place to go, so they found their safe haven in Israel.
And those people had been living in those Arab countries for
Centuries.
Yeah, centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
They had been living there, and now all of a sudden they could not live in those countries anymore. I also wanted, no, I forgot what I was going to say. Do you have anything you want to add to this?
I think we've done a pretty good job. We could always talk about this topic ad nauseum for however many hours, but I think we've covered.
Oh, I know what I wanted to add. You talked about right of return, and just in case anybody doesn't, I just wanted to clarify a little. It means if you're Jewish, you have a right to go to Israel at any time and become an Israeli citizen, just by virtue of the fact that you were Jewish. And I think, just to be clear about the understanding of it, which you touched on briefly, these people were survivors of the Holocaust. So they were people who had been thrown out and persecuted in countries like Poland, where they had lived for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and now all of a sudden they didn't feel they could return to a country. I mean, and they were part of a group where 6 million people had been killed just because they were Jewish. So you have to kind of think about the mentality of these people when they were coming to Israel, and how they felt the need to be 100% sure that if this ever happened again, or happened anywhere, and that they wanted to know there was some place that people could escape to, because they had nowhere to escape. America wouldn't take them in. America wouldn't take them in, right? We all know there's a famous story about the boat that Roosevelt turned away with Jews from Germany early in the war, right? So they had nowhere to go. So if you look at their mentality at that time, you kind of understand the mentality of the founding of Israel. Because they said, this will never happen again. Everybody will be able to come here. Everybody will have a safe place to go. If they can escape, they have a place to go. They have a place where they're welcomed. And that was an important thought at the time Israel was founded. And that's one of the reasons for right of return. That's one of the reasons even now where they feel it needs to be a Jewish state. Because if they lose it from being a Jewish state, if they lose that control over the state, then they lose that ability to know they have someplace safe. And World War II, number one, is not that long ago. So it's not something where we're talking about something that happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we say it could never happen. Because if it could happen 60 years ago, 80 years ago, 100 years ago. And the other thing is, it happened in Germany, a country where the Jews were very comfortably established. If you look at who emigrated here from Germany at that time, people like Albert Einstein, they were educated, they were a fully integrated part of the society, and that's where the war started. So the mentality of these people is, if it could happen in Germany, it can absolutely happen anywhere in the world. And that was part of what they wanted to ensure when they developed Israel, and that mentality lives on. And I think as outsiders, a lot of people don't really fully understand that, and that why the mentality is the way it is so strongly about keeping it a Jewish state and why it's so important. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that and touch on that briefly. All right, as you said, I think we've covered this, so I'd like to go a little closer to home, and really I think, Rabbi Reed, if you could talk a little bit about on campus, how it's affecting, I mean, you see Jewish students coming to Hillel, how are they affected by the anti-Semitism on campus? What forms of anti-Semitism are they seeing on campus, and how are they reacting to it? And, talk a little bit about what college life is now.
So first I want to share that Rutgers, New Brunswick has one of the largest Jewish undergraduate populations in the country, 6,400 Jewish undergraduate students in New Brunswick. And we have a very strong, active, thriving, positive Jewish life. So many of our students are very comfortable being Jewish on campus. We have students who publicly will wear a yarmulke or other identifying symbols of being Jewish, wear a Jewish star necklace or whatever it might be. If you were to ask the Hillel student president about his experiences of anti-Semitism, and he's an Orthodox male student who wears a yarmulke every day, he'll tell you he has never experienced it in all his years at Rutgers. At the same time, there are other students who have experienced anti-Semitism, and the case at Rutgers that's most well known is there's a Jewish fraternity on campus which had eggs thrown at the fraternity on Holocaust Memorial Day, both 2021 and 2022, as they were sitting outside for 24 hours reading names of Holocaust victims. Sometime in the middle of the night, someone egged the building on another side, on one of the side walls, one year, and the other side wall the other year. They were also egged on the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year 2022. So students at AEPI definitely feel that there's anti-Semitism on campus and that they are targeted as a Jewish fraternity, that people walking down the street say things and shout things at them, and this is their home. This is where they live, and they self-identify as a Jewish safe haven, as a place where Jewish students can feel comfortable, and it's really problematic. There's also a story that I tell about a student at Rutgers Newark. Rutgers Newark has a very small Jewish population, and there are a lot of students on that campus who are publicly promoting anti-Israel ideas. And she commutes to campus every day, and as she gets out of her car, she takes her Jewish star and she tucks it into her shirt. And I actually had the opportunity to testify before a committee of the House of Representatives in October, and I told her story, and Richie Torres, who was chairing, he's the vice chair of the committee, but he was chairing that particular session, said, so she has to be in the closet. Jews on campus have to be in the closet. And in her case, that is true. There are Jewish students who feel they can't publicly express their Judaism and show who they are because they might be targeted for being Jewish. Now, there is this concept that Holly mentioned before, BDS, which is the Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions Movement, which are those who want to have universities pass resolutions to boycott Israel, to divest from holdings, financial holdings with Israeli companies, and sanction Israel as a country. And usually when a BDS resolution is brought to a university student government, there is angry debate on both sides. It's usually very ugly. And when it does pass, it's largely symbolic because the student government will be passing a resolution urging the university to take that action, but the university may choose not to. And in many cases, most cases, they choose not to take that action. But it brings up all this ugliness where there are these things said against Israel, which then means that Jewish students are targeted. We had a Jewish student at, I believe it was University of Southern California, who a few years ago was elected to student government, and then there were concerns that she couldn't be on student government because she herself is Jewish, and therefore she wouldn't be able to be impartial when it comes to her role on student government. So we do have Jewish students who are being targeted in many ways. I could go on for literally an hour talking about different incidents of things that have happened on different campuses, but the bottom line is that what we have seen is when there are campuses that have a strong anti-Israel group on campus, that tends to increase the anti-Semitism expressed on that campus and the anti-Semitism that Jewish students face and experience on that campus. I'm very proud to say that we've never had a BDS resolution at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, and I hope that that will continue to be the case because of the hard work that Rutgers Hillel has done and continues to do.
So I'm going to say something about tying in with what you said about the BDS movement. None of us are here to say that Israel is perfect or everything Israel does is correct. But like you said, there are countries that are doing far worse and treating the people in their countries far worse. And you don't see BDS movements against any of those countries. That's not to say that everything Israel does is right, or we shouldn't speak out against those things that Israel is doing. But to target Israel in such a strong way with the BDS movements across campuses around the country, where we're not targeting, like you said, Syria, with a PDS movement across campuses across the country, when things in Syria are so much worse, or in China or wherever else. That's what makes you feel like it's anti-Semitism. They're choosing to target Israel where the Jews are, with a BDS movement, yet allowing atrocities that are far worse in countries, in Africa and in many countries where there's genocide, in what they're doing with the Myanmar, where they're killing, right? Yeah. They're killing them, and there's no BDS movement there. So that's not, it's not to say that Israel's perfect, but it's to say that when we're singled out as a country, when Israel is singled out as a country, or when we're singled out as a people, that's when it becomes not criticism, but anti-Semitism. That's what makes the BDS movement so hurtful. It's not that they shouldn't be saying Israel did these things wrong, but it's only Israel that does these things wrong.
I'll just very quickly add, the fact that BDS and other groups automatically assume that somebody who's Jewish is a Zionist or supports the state of Israel, that in itself is anti-Semitism. So that's really important to say. Which is why I'm assuming that a lot of the reason why anti-Semitism, suddenly, grows on campus, via BDS's action is because of that assumption that if you're Jewish, you're a Zionist.
Well, I would say that the majority of Jews in this country are Zionists,
right.
With the assumption that if you're Jewish, that means you automatically support every policy of a particular government and state of Israel.
That's a better way to say it.
That you yourself are responsible for the actions of a government thousands of miles away across an ocean.
Right.
I vote every election in the United States, but I'm still not single-handedly responsible for what a particular president might pass as a policy or a decision of the Supreme Court. And so to say that, oh, you're Jewish, so you're responsible for what Israel has done in this particular case, how can an American Jew, a 19-year-old who grew up in the United States, be responsible for what has happened in Israel?
Thank you. That was a lot better.
And how could they even make a change?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, how could they even make a change? They have no influence, no say, and yet they're blamed. Rabbi Hess, I'd like to talk a little bit about your congregation. And before that, I'd like to talk about two things. First of all, I'd like to talk about the fact that we feel it need to keep the doors locked, right? We were not open for anybody to walk in at any time. And we feel that security is a very important part of maintaining a house of worship. And also a little bit about an incident that happened recently where there was a threat that was posed by a gunman, posted, and the FBI caught it, and the synagogues were informed of it, thankfully, in time. And I happen to know that one house of worship in East Brunswick felt it necessary to cancel services due to this threat. So threats against Jews are so real that there are times we can't even go to a house of worship and pray on the Sabbath when we would be going. And as it turns out, that gunman was in Sayreville, which means we are the closest community to that gunmen with houses of worship. So most likely, had he been able to carry through this threat, somebody in East Brunswick one of the houses of worship in East Brunswick would have been the target, which is why one of them closed for the day. So two things: how close to home such a real threat is, and how we could be prevented from worshiping because of this threat, and how we worship in an environment we feel that we have to worry about being secure in. So that's one part I'd like you to talk about. And the other thing I'd like you to talk about is as an Orthodox congregation, as a man who walks around wearing a yarmulke, do you feel uncomfortable? Have you experienced anything, or your congregation, have you heard anything about them feeling any anti-Semitism?
Okay, so I'll first address the incident that took place for the young man in Sayreville. As soon as there was an announcement on social media that there was someone who was targeting Jewish synagogues, and everyone should be on high alert. So everyone, as a rabbi, so I'm getting emails from my parents from Israel and my father-in-law and my mother-in-law in New York, like, be careful, to New Jersey, something's happening. Like another one, just so conditioned, like, okay, but don't have to worry about it. I'm sitting in my office till later in the evening and just going about my business. You have to be careful. And then when you find out that it's in Sayreville, like, oh my goodness, I'm glad that we took the proper precautions and we did what we needed to do to make sure that our congregation knew to be vigilant about any potential threat. So it does hit closer to home, and it does make you perk up a little bit to be on high alert for sure. But yeah, as Orthodox Jews, I guess, have the honor, I would say, to be outwardly proud of our religion and not afraid to show that we're Jewish and we're happy, we're who we are in our skin, but at the same time, because we're more visible, that can make people feel a little uncomfortable. So it is different. It is different when you're walking down the street on a Saturday morning, since we're not driving in our cars, and you may hear something out the window, but you never know. Like, you could be walking down the street. Maybe, again, these are the crazy things that go through your mind as a Jew, is maybe someone's going to veer off with their car and just run me over. Those are the crazy things that you would never think would cross someone's mind, but that's what I think about when I'm walking to synagogue. So we certainly are more vigilant. When I spoke to the mayor a few months ago, he noted that it's easy to walk into a church. There isn't much in terms. They don't need a key to lock code. Just open the door and you walk in, and you can do whatever you need to do. If that doesn't happen in a synagogue, there's much more security, and things are limited in access. You can't just walk in. If you don't make prior arrangements to get in and you're not part of the synagogue, it's just not going to happen. So it's certainly for us challenging. It does make us a little nervous, but at the same time, life has to go on. You have to keep on living, and you try not to live in fear, and that's the key for anyone really, but certainly as Jews, Orthodox Jews, whatever the case may be, it's certainly something that we know we just keep on moving forward and do our best to make sure that if you see something, say something, I guess, as a little bit cliches. In terms of the synagogue itself, is what's been really interesting that I've seen as a response to what has been happening, the growing anti-Semitism. I have received more requests from congregants to write letters of recommendation to the state of New Jersey to carry a firearm. I never had that before. In the last 2 years or so, I've been getting more requests from my congregants. They want to start carrying a concealed carrying permit, and was very surprising to me. But I understand the concern. People are so nervous that they want to make sure that they're protected. So that's something new. That in light of the more recent events, the growing anti-Semitism in the United States that I've seen.
And it's sad to think that someone who never thought about carrying a gun feels it's like, okay, I wear a yarmulke, I need a gun. That shouldn't be like a something that goes together, right?
So I wouldn't be doing justice to the organization that I work for if I didn't just add something, what I can talk about. Jewish Federation in the heart of New Jersey has mechanisms in place to alert the community when necessary, and this incident that we're discussing was actually the first time we used it for real. we also have a full-time security director. So that kind of also lets you know, what we're dealing with here, that we have to have a full-time security director to coordinate, these kinds of things, and especially alerts when that happens. The other thing I will say is that I think I will speak for all of us. We all have very good relationships with law enforcement, and they really do understand the situation, and they really do an amazing job protecting our institutions. So I really thought that was something that needed to be said, and I think, I'm assuming you all agree here, we see them all the time, and they are really wonderful, and here in East Brunswick as well.
Yeah, we have a relationship with law enforcement. We meet with them regularly to discuss different strategies, how to protect our synagogue. Again, they're not meeting with the churches to go over these procedures. We meet with them to talk about active shooter drills. We're doing active now they call it active killer drills, but either way, that's something that happens in synagogue. They're not doing that necessarily in other houses of worship. So these are things that are on our minds all the time, and we have to set up fire drills and active shooter drills, and it could be in the middle of the winter, but we have to make sure that everyone feels safe.
I'll add also that Jewish Federation works with all the institutions to apply for grants from the state and also the federal government. It's called a nonprofit security grant, to obtain funding for what we call target hardening, and that's also just regular life for anyone that's managing, whether it's a Hillel or a synagogue. This is just a routine part of their lives, and I say there because I don't manage a building, but not really. But that's important really to say as well. This is really just has become routine. We all have stop the bleed kits in our buildings. It used to be only what do they call it for heart attacks? AEDs.
AED defibrillators.
Now it's stop the bleed kits. This has just become routine for all Jewish institutions.
And I feel like we sound like we're all paranoid, but if you look at the statistics of anti-Semitism and the sentiment, it's a real fear.
After what happened in Pittsburgh and what happened in Colleyville, Texas, we have evidence that this happens in the United States. I want to share with you a colleague of mine who's a rabbi in a different community in New Jersey went to the clergy meeting for all different faiths, and they got together as clergy, and one of the Christian clergy members was talking about how concerned that person was. Should they start locking the front door? Should they not lock the front door? And the rabbi was like, we just did an active shooter drill with our preschool this morning. Like, what are you talking about? I remember when I was growing up, people would tell me stories that when they went to Europe, if they wanted to visit a synagogue, they had to register in advance. They had to give them their passport. There was all sorts of security protocols. And I was like, that's not going to happen here. The door's unlocked. We could come into any synagogue anytime. I can go visit a friend in another community, go to their synagogue, no problem. And now I'm living in a time where the doors at the synagogues are locked, there are security guards, and we're much more careful about those sorts of things. So times have changed.
On the list to get in.
Things have changed. Things have definitely changed.
When I was young, I went to Europe, and we wanted to go to a synagogue. I was with my cousin, and we had to stop at the door. We had to show a passport. They had to search our backpacks. They had to search us. They had to, interview us, and it was not just walk in. And same thing. We were like, "What is
like the
this?"
airport.
Yeah, we were like, "What is this?
Absolutely.
We don't have this at home." It was such a foreign concept to us, and now it's here.
I think a lot of Jews get the feeling, Jews that I've spoken with have the feeling that America is always like 10 years behind Europe. And when we see what's happening in Europe and the fact that so many Jews are leaving Europe, moving to Israel, making Aliyah, that's something that Americans start looking at and like, is it going to be the same thing? Is it? And it's getting progressively, it's deteriorating by the day, by the month, by the year, and that becomes a cold, hard reality. Well, what's the future of Jews in America? And it's a scary thought. I hope it doesn't come to that. But these are the thoughts on our minds daily.
And I think World War II contributes to us feeling that way because, like I said earlier, if it could happen in Germany, you start to think, if you see anti-Semitism growing, what's to stop it from getting out of hand here? What puts an end to this? How? That's really, I guess, at the end, biggest point of this discussion. How do we put a cap on this? How do we put an end to this? How do we dial back the rhetoric so we don't get to the point where Jews in America, there is 3 places in the United States that have a large concentration of Jews: France, America, and Israel. And in France, we see they're starting to feel like maybe they can't be there. They have to go to Israel. And I know France is working to try to end that feeling. And so now the U.S., are we going to start to feel like we can't be here, like you said? So how do we dial back that rhetoric? How do we change that mentality? How do we make it so that we can feel, again, safer and more welcome and get people to understand better what Israel is, what being Jewish is, and break that anti-Semitic chain that's growing, that anti-Semitic feeling that's growing and growing.
I want to say 2 things about that. First, one thing we can do is what we're doing tonight, which is education, talking about anti-Semitism publicly, having our non-Jewish friends have the opportunity to ask us questions, to understand what is really happening for us, what are we experiencing, and to be able to recognize it and learn about it. So education, I think, is an important piece. But the second piece I would say is calling out anti-Semitism, whether you're Jewish or not. When there's something anti-Semitic being said, to decry it and to say that that is wrong, because words will lead to action. And if we can cut it off at the level of words, then hopefully there won't be that type of action. But when there is some sort of anti-Semitic language or even an incident, our leaders need to stand up and say that that's wrong. And I think that part of the reason anti-Semitism has grown is because there have been some leaders in this country who have emboldened those who are anti-Semitic and have let them think it's okay to be anti-Semitic.
So I want to touch on education for a minute. Education is key to combating hate. Jewish Federation has recognized that. We're not the only organization that's recognized that, but we have taken the initiative, and we've been working with Senator Vin Gopal, who is a state senator down in Monmouth County, who also is the Senate Education Chair. We've been working on legislation with him that, if passed, and I'm very confident it will create a survey in the state of New Jersey that will be sent to all school districts to understand how and in what way they're teaching Holocaust and genocide in the schools, which, if you don't know, is mandated. There is a law in New Jersey that you have to teach that in the schools. However, what there isn't, there's no set guideline, there's no set curriculum. It's not uniform. Each school can kind of do what they want, and we're working to change that. There is something in the Department of Education, there's a body called the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education. They have a curriculum that is age appropriate from 4th grade all the way to 12th. That needs to be inserted into the school districts. So we're working on getting that done. And if that happens, is it going to solve hate and anti-Semitism? No, but it could make a dent in, this is a long-term solution. This is an investment. It's not a short-term solution. But that's what we have to do. You said it, like, it's education. I recently went on a trip with 8th graders. It was an interfaith trip with 8th graders to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. It was 2 weeks ago. I've been there, and I've been to the Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, many times. I studied the Holocaust. I went to Jewish day schools. However, to see these 8th graders experience the horrors for the first time in their lives and understand what hateful words can lead to was mind-blowing. They had no idea. So that just validates, that proves how important education is, and what an amazing tool or an important tool that is to really make a dent in anti-Semitism and all hate towards all people.
And I think there's another form of education, which is getting to know each other. Mm-hmm. If you get to know somebody who's Jewish, if you come across somebody who's Jewish, you meet somebody who's Jewish, don't automatically make assumptions. Don't automatically draw conclusions. Get to know them, talk to them, understand them. Let them explain to you, maybe you have misconceptions, or are things you don't understand. Because I think one-on-one, when you meet somebody, when you get to know somebody, and then you learn about their culture, their religion, I think it's true for everybody, for any culture and any religion, that stops hate. That knowing another person and understanding that person is the best way to stop hate.
I would say that along the same lines, the challenge that we have, and this is also gets to your question before, how to stem the tide, is that Israel has become a political football, and now everyone is battling in this culture war and identity politics, and you have to pick a side, and just the noise becomes so great that now it almost seems like sometimes that you can only love Israel if you're a Republican, and if you hate Israel if you're a Democrat. That's almost what it seems like sometimes when I have to listen to the news, which is obviously a crazy thing to hear. But these types of identity politics creates an environment in which it's almost impossible to talk to another person, because it's not just Israel versus America, or does Israel have a right to exist? But you love Israel, you're this politically, you're a Republican, I'm not talking to you, or you're a Democrat, I'm not talking to you. And then so the whole conversation gets lost in the larger American milieu, and that's something which is also unfortunate, but it's a reality that we live with.
And the more divisive we become about everything, I think the easier it is to hate. So, if we can hate by political parties, and we can, as you said, not talk to someone for that, it becomes easier to say, well, you're a Jew, I don't talk to you, or you're black, I don't talk to you, Once that hate politics, and once that seed of hate and that feeling of hate exists, it's easy for that to spill over into other areas. And sadly, Jews have traditionally been a big target of where that spills over, so. Do either of you have any questions? No.
I would just say the same thing. Ignorance is the root cause of hate. The more education, the more these kind of panel discussions happen. It's required. It's required to educate people. But that's it.
Do any of you feel there's something we haven't touched on before we end?
I think we're good.
While tonight's event was focused on anti-Semitism, we want to acknowledge the fact that people of nearly every race and religious background have faced violence throughout our country's history. Whether that be the Islamophobia following September 11th, police brutality faced by black people, or the shootings targeting Asian Americans in the past few days. It is a sad but true fact that no group has been able to escape acts of violence brought upon them simply because of who they are. We want to remind everyone to always stand up against any act of hatred or violence, even if you do not belong to the group being targeted. To paraphrase author and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, neutrality only helps the oppressor, never the victim. If you fail to protect the rights of others, it is only a matter of time before your rights are in danger. There's nothing more important than protecting your family, friends, and neighbors from an act of hate, no matter how small. I want to thank our panelists, Rabbi Reed, Rabbi Hess, and Dan Rozett, and our co-sponsors, the Jewish Federation in the Heart of New Jersey, the East Brunswick Interfaith Clergy Council, and the Daniel Pearl Education Center. Thank you to my fellow organizers, Holly, Dovey, and Nusrat, as well as the rest of the East Brunswick Human Relations Council for supporting the Coffee and Conversation series. As always, thank you to EBTV for helping us broadcast, and to all of those tuning in, thank you for joining us tonight.